Welcome to the Peering Podcast, where the best way to see the future is to peer into it together. It's smart talk with a twinkle in its eye, about peer power, leadership agility, and collective intelligence in a world spinning faster every day. Hosted by Mike Richardson and friends, we peer into what it really takes to stay human, stay curious, and stay future ready. Real conversation, where peers get curious, curiosity gets peery, and leadership gets real. So pull up a chair and let's peer into it together.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Peering Podcast. The best way to see the future is to peer into it together. I'm excited about this one, everybody. I've been waiting for this one to come around, and here we are. I have two of my longest, best, dearest friends and colleagues on the podcast with me today, Susan Kuruvilla and Mark Neilson. How are you doing today, Susan, Mark?
Excellent.
Good. Really glad to have them here. We go back, I'm guessing, plus or minus 20 years, roughly speaking. And we'll find out more about that in a moment. We are now all partners together in REF, previously known as Renaissance Executive Forums, subsequently rebranded to REF, REF peer groups in San Diego and the sort of bigger Southern California area up here in Temecula, Murrieta, and we have colleagues doing this in Orange County and LA and other places, and not least of all nationally and globally. And no better two people to get onto a podcast to talk about, peering, peer groups and peer power and all that great stuff, because Mark and Susan have been members of peer groups. They've been and are facilitators of peer groups, and now they're partners of building a peer group organization. So I'm really excited about having this conversation today. Mark, can we start with you? Do you remember, I don't know exactly, how on earth did you and I first meet?
Well, I was the managing partner for the San Diego office of a national CFO for rent or hire firm called Tatum, and someone suggested that we meet, and I was in a managing partner role for the first time in my career, and I wasn't sure exactly what that meant. You and I had lunch. You explained what it was. I didn't really know what peer groups were all about. I had never experienced it before, so you invited me to guest at a meeting. I came.
And there are some funny stories right out of the gate associated with Mark's first meeting. We'll come to that in a moment. And that must have been, Mark, what, 2006?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Roughly in there somewhere. But so that is 20 years. And so it's a story where you didn't know what something was. Then fast forward, you're knee deep in the business.
So we'll come back to that in a moment. Susan, I think you and I met a little bit after that, but not too long after that. How did you and I first meet?
Yeah, I actually think we met before that, because I started in actually a peer group, and it wasn't a great experience. And then I moved, then I met you. I think someone introduced us. I think some YPO connections introduced us. And I moved into your key group and was there for a few years before I moved into the CEO group. And that's where I met Mark, was in that CEO group, which I think was around 2008 when I moved into the CEO group.
And just tell us a bit more about that, because I think when we first met, I think you were a CFO, correct, of a private company. And then you became the CEO of that private company. And then that private company got bought by a public company. And so now you were a CEO of a business unit working inside of a public company. Just tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. So we, I guess, were acquired by a public company. We spent 5.5 years trying to sell the company, and then acquired by a public company. And then I ran it for them for 5.5 years. And so, became part of an $8 billion, global organization based in the Midwest. And we were like a little rounding error in terms of our revenue, but basically added a new sector to their business model is what
beautiful.
How we were accretive to their business.
Yeah, beautiful. And I remember those days distinctly when you were going through all those transitions. And before that, you joined the key group as a key executive, and then you got promoted to be the CEO. So you joined the CEO group. That's where you may have met Mark before, but that's where you and Mark got to sort of ride along
correct.
in the same group. And back to the funny stories about Mark. So I actually had to ask the other member that was involved in this, who we all know dearly, Tom, I actually had to ask him a few years ago, Tom, was that a dream or did that actually happen? And both him and Mark confirmed, no, this actually happened. Do you want to tell the story, Mark?
No, I'd like you to tell the story.
So Mark comes to his first peer group meeting, and obviously I've chatted with him before. And I don't know, maybe I wasn't crystal clear about the dress code, because Mark, of course, does a lot of very professional business around town at the time. And so, bless him, he showed up in what might even have been a suit and tie, not just a jacket and tie. I think it was actually a suit and tie. So I don't know, Susan, he looked the part. I mean, he really did. It was like dead on bullseye. Everybody else is in, shirts and T-shirts and Hawaiian shirts and I don't know, jeans and slacks. And I don't know, there's probably somebody wearing a pair of shorts in there somewhere. So one of our dear members who we all know, Tom, I don't know, he scurried off somewhere, asked an assistant or something, or the person behind the lobby. And next thing you know, he comes back in the room with a pair of scissors and he walks up to Mark. And I think he sort of mildly asks Mark's permission, kind of silently, and cuts off his tie. I don't know if we got a photograph or not, Mark. I wish we had. Back in those days, maybe we didn't all have, brilliant smartphones in our pockets, so we didn't get the picture. But
I'm glad I didn't wear one of my good ties that day. So,
and actually, the other funny story about Mark's is he comes to that first meeting, spends all the whole meeting with us, dives in head first, plays along. We treat him like a member, plays along. We have a speaker and we do some round table stuff, and we process a case, issue processing, and seems like he gets a lot out of it, gives a lot to it, and then leaves. Everybody leaves, and the following morning I get a voicemail from Mark saying, "Hey Mike, thanks for having me yesterday. I think I've made a terrible mistake." And he goes on to say, I think I might not have time for this, because obviously he's got back to his desk and his, inbox is overflowing, and his voicemail light, keep in mind, this is 2006, everybody. His voicemail light on his, desk telephone is blinking at him furiously. And so, of course, I try to call him back and I don't get him. I get his voicemail. So I say, Mark, look, I just invite you to wonder whether this might be part of your time management problem, or rather part of your time management solution. And if you'll just try it for 3 to 6 months, I think you will rapidly find that it will become part of your time management solution. And not only did he try it for 3 to 6 months, Mark, you remember for how many years?
I'd say 12 in your group, and then I stayed in when you departed. I stayed in other groups.
Yeah, and by that time, Susan, you'd been a member for nearly 12 years as well, maybe 11 or 10, something like that. And so not only did Mark stay 3 to 6 months, he stayed 12 years, and then stayed on, and then begin to tell us the story. Would you? How did the two of you decide to become partners in acquiring Ref San Diego, the franchise license for Ref San Diego? How did that happen?
Well, why don't I start, and then let Susan kind of carry the ball. So it so happens that I was facilitating a CFO group for what was then called Renaissance Executive Forums while I was in the Vistage group, because that was not really a conflict of interest. And so the then owner of the franchise for Renaissance Executive Forums, now Ref, said he was on a retirement pathway and would I be interested in maybe acquiring his franchise. And I said, yeah, sure, put my name in the hat. And then I reached out for Susan, because she was now in transition from what she had been doing. And I'll let Susan take it from there.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Sure. So about probably not quite a year before Mark approached me, maybe 8 months before, I had decided I didn't want to go back into another full-time CEO position. and decided that I was craving variety and I wanted to do a variety of different things. And so I was working with a company in Orange County that I still work with 7 years later. But I said, you can have a lot of me, but you can't have all of me. And I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of it, but I'm going to do something different. And so about 5 months after that, Mark approached me. And at that point, Mark, you had actually already approached someone else as well in conversation, the first partner that was with us for a hot minute. And I think literally Mark asked me in one conversation, and I said yes without any hesitation, any thinking, let me get back to you, chatting with other people, my spouse in particular, and just said, I'm game. I'm in. What do I need to do? And that hilariously was February, March of 2020.
Right before
so,
COVID.
Right before, correct. And then I remember when the pandemic hit in mid-March, we're like, oh, that's fine. This will be over by June. We were just off by maybe a year or two. We funded actually the acquisition April of 2020.
Unbelievable. Your timing is exquisite. I mean, it's just beautiful, beautiful thing.
We didn't do anything other than orientation for that first 9 months. So it was, kind of a quiet period.
And then, somewhere in the mix, sort of progressively over time, Mark and Susan sort of started pinging me and said, hey, you fancy getting involved with us? And I was up to my neck doing other things and came back from that. And so we continued the conversation. And, then I think in January 24, I came on board and joined them as an equity partner. And we've been, building and progressing the Ref San Diego community ever since. And indeed, spreading our wings up here into Temecula, Murrieta. We're also doing Ref, et cetera, et cetera. So, Susan, perhaps we can start with you. Just fill in a little bit more of the background. Where are you from? What was your career? And then as you started getting involved in peer groups, what was it about your peer group experience that caused you to become so dedicated to it?
So I started my career in finance. Basically was a finance major in college, worked in commercial lending, decided I couldn't do that for the rest of my life. I wanted to be on the company side, went to business school, and joined American Airlines Finance in Dallas. And so was there for 7 years, and then met my husband, came to San Diego, and then joined this privately held company where I was for 18 years. And so when you work at a Fortune 500 company, you have peers galore, right? All these freshly minted MBAs, peers turn around, you have peers everywhere. You then move into a small company and, the peer group's like one hand or less of people. And so I missed that in terms of the actual need. And so for me, being a CFO of a privately held company without a lot of peers in the organization was the reason that I was attracted to becoming part of a peer group and just helping with my own, continued learning as a leader. And, was in the CFO role for, I think, 12 years and then became president for another, 6-7 years. And then after that, after I left the public company, then I moved to another small company, also as CEO for about 3 years, and was still also in a peer group as, again, a way to have a group of people that are peers, especially when you're the top leader in the organization. You don't have a lot of people you can chat with confidentially. And so it was a big part of my business career here in San Diego, where I've been now for 28 years. And we still have dear friends, right, that we met in that group, Mike, that you led all those years ago. And so when Mark, asked, I was like, well, I'm not going to be in an operating role anymore. So yeah, this would be a great way to remain involved with peer groups from a different seat at the table, right? Which is really still a round table, right? That we're just there to help facilitate the conversation between and amongst the folks in the room in our peer groups.
And what was it about your experience as a member of a peer group that whatever level you can try to take us to here, that sort of convinced you that how valuable this is?
Well, like anything, you don't know what you don't know. And so all the speakers and learning from your mates and mistakes that people made, successes that people, experience, kind of is like a best practice little factory. And so you're exposed to kind of real time, current topical information sharing that is invaluable. And I will just share, during the pandemic, when the information was just flying fast and furious from the government and all these different sources, without being in a peer group at that time, there's no way that leaders could have kept up with everything they needed to know and learn, because it was changing so fast to stay abreast of what they needed to be doing inside their organizations.
Yeah.
So,
because your timing was exquisite, but what you did is you pivoted to virtual peer groups for as long as you had to, right? So you kept the process going. The members were still having the experience. They were just having to do it virtually for a while.
That's correct.
Yeah, beautiful. Mark, do you want to weigh in here? Just tell us a little bit more about your career path, where you're from, your career path, and then as you became a member of a peer group, what was it about your experience of it that sort of convicted you to wanting to dedicate yourself to this?
Yeah, thanks. I Midwesterner for the most part, originally East Coast, but grew up in the Midwest and moved out here to California 20 years ago for better weather, frankly. And I was in public accounting, and like many CPAs, I went the CFO route, and actually did that for 25 years back in the Midwest. And then when I moved out here, I decided I didn't want to be a CFO anymore, but I wanted to still be involved in, kind of financial stuff. And so I was the managing partner for a CFO firm, which, rented out or sold CFOs. So I was still in the business, but not in the seat. And that's when I joined as a managing partner. I all of a sudden had P&L responsibility, and I joined your peer group. And along that journey, in fact, I had convinced you a few years into that, everybody knows this, it's lonely at the top for CEOs and presidents, but it's equally lonely at the top as the co-pilot, which is often the CFO. And so you actually repurposed one of your groups to be a CFO group, which was the only one in the maybe 1,000 worldwide groups. And then that's when I was also starting to co-lead a group with Renaissance Executive Forums, because, I think you came to also see, and Susan has lived this, but being the co-pilot as CFO is lonely too. And they need peers just like CEOs need peers, because oftentimes CEOs don't really even know what their CFOs do.
And I'll just chime in, Mark, that when I was CFO, I was in a key group, and I don't think there were any other CFOs in the group at the time. And I would have absolutely preferred to be in a group with just other CFOs, but it didn't exist. So I think what you started was a spectacular opportunity to really serve a different set of leaders in the San Diego community.
Yeah, and it's sort of the origin story, isn't it? And we'll come to this in a moment, of why you at first, and then as I joined you, why we've built the portfolio of peer forums that we've built. We'll come back to that in a moment. But Mark, I remember those days distinctly, where I had two traditional key executive groups, one of which Susan had been in before, and then subsequently sort of come on up to the CEO group. And they were both in good shape, but they weren't 100% full. And so Mark came to me one day and said, well, why don't you merge two into one, leave the empty shell of the other one, and let's pivot it to be specifically for CFOs. And I would be the facilitator of record, but Mark would come on board as a co-pilot, and not least of all, help fill the group, but also bring, some of the experience and expertise, as a recovering CFO himself. And it worked phenomenally, didn't it, Mark? I mean, we filled that thing, you filled that thing really quickly. They absolutely loved it, and we just ran it until I left. For various reasons, a longer story, I left that organization. We've mentioned their name already, Vistage. Everybody can guess. It's on our LinkedIn profiles and everything. So it was Vistage. Vistage was a great experience. Something ran across my path that I wanted to roll the dice on, and I left for 3 years. And then when I pivoted back, and lo and behold, Mark and Susan had bought Renaissance Executive Forum San Diego, subsequently rebranded to REF Ref. And I was thrilled that you did. And we'll come to that why more in a moment.
Mike, if I could finish another comment is, while I was also managing partner for this CFO firm, I had the good fortune of being on and continue to be on corporate boards. And so when I was in your Vistage group, I was paying for that myself. I did not have a business to sponsor that. And I was doing it because it made me a better leader, obviously, but it also made me a better board member. And the other part of my portfolio career is being on corporate boards. And I've encouraged a lot of CEOs and CFOs and other executives to consider that as part of their future, maybe even their current path. But I will tell you, yesterday was a great example. We had our CFO group, and it is now overflowing because it is true that, first of all, there aren't a lot of other, I don't think there's any other peer groups for CFOs in San Diego. So we're kind of the only game in town for that. But one of the topics yesterday was about meetings. Having a meeting matrix, having great agendas. And every single person in the room was agonizing about meetings. And so they said, finally, we've got a group of people who appreciate what I'm going through. And we had good best practice conversation and all that. But just a simple topic like meetings, they had nobody else to talk to about this. And they all left yesterday saying that was the thing that they took away, was how they're going to kind of go get their arms around all important concept of meetings and agendas.
And Susan, you're on a number of boards as well. Anything you want to throw on the fire of what Mark's just said?
No, I guess reiterate. It's really about best practice sharing, right? When you're busy in your operating role, you're busy with all your, whatever meetings and deliverables, and you're not necessarily, lifting your head up and scouring best practices in these different arenas of topics and disciplines and functions. And so it really is, I think, an incredible time saver on how to put important topics top of mind with success stories of why they should remain topics top of mind when you leave the meeting. And so it's one thing to read a book. It's one thing to listen to a podcast. But, when you hear what's, the success that someone had implementing something, you're like, oh, you pay attention. And the other thing that I will just share is I'll never forget going to a meeting and being super frustrated with something I was struggling with. I don't even remember what it was, but it felt horrible at the time. By the end of the meeting, and you hear what some other people in the room are struggling with, you're like, okay, I got nothing on what that person's struggling with. I'm good. I'm going to keep my problem. I've just had a mental mindset shift on really it's not that big of a deal, right? I'm making it into more of a big of a deal. That person has a real thing that they're dealing with. And so it really was also a great perspective shifter, just listening to what others are going through.
Beautiful. I think that those are great examples you both shared, where there are so many nuanced levels of value in the experience. And sometimes it can be as simple as what you've just said, Susan. You know what? I've regained some perspective. I've put things back in proportion. I've put a lid on things that have been rattling around, and beating me up, all the way to, wow, I'm part of a really great meeting here that's not overstructured, it's not understructured, it flows really well. We hear from everybody. There's psychological safety in the room. There's transparency, there's challenge, there's confrontation, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder how I can take those secrets back into my business and have better meetings back in my business. And also what you've touched upon, Mark, is probably the inevitability, everybody that might be listening, if you're a CEO already or a C-suite executive already, it's inevitable that you're going to be on boards. At some point in your life, you probably are already, in some way, shape, or form, at least a charity or a nonprofit or a business school or something. But it's an inevitability that you're going to be on more significant boards in the future. And so understanding how great board meetings happen, we're talking about peer groups here, sometimes called peer advisory boards. They're not a million miles away from advisory boards or even governance boards in business, because that is a peer-powered process. That's why you have a diverse governance board or a diverse advisory board, and you can really learn the secrets in a peer advisory board. If I may, Mark, it's one thing to be committed to being in a peer group. it's another level of commitment to decide I'm going to build a peer group community. I'm going to build a portfolio of peer groups, and we're approaching about 100 members now in San Diego. I'm going to lead with Susan then coming on board and now me. I'm going to lead a business of peer groups, not just being in peer groups. That's another level of commitment. What's the why behind that, Mark?
Yeah, well, I think I got hooked, after having my tie cut off and thinking I'd made a big mistake. It's like the hair club president, now I'm a member. Anyways, to answer your question, it's you get hooked on the feeling, frankly, of like at the end of a meeting, how good it feels, whether you're the facilitator or a member, to see that somehow you just raised everybody's bar a little bit. And for me personally, since it's true that every CFO role is different, and there is no handbook on how to be a CEO, but definitely no handbook on how to be a CFO. So my personal experience of, frankly, almost getting fired from my first CFO job, because I didn't know what I was really supposed to be doing until someone pulled me aside. And all these other folks are dealing with the same thing. Their CEOs don't know what their CFOs are supposed to be doing. But the other thing was, and one from Vistage, which, is a great experience. They're not an international firm for no reason. They're great. But we decided to create a bit of more of a blue ocean model here. It turns out that like CFOs or sales executives or they kind of want to be around people that speak their language. So that's why we kind of went, yeah, we have CEO groups, and we're even looking at doing some of those that are somewhat vertical, in an industry or maybe a situation. But we've got a whole bunch of key groups because we observed that our competitors really weren't doing that. And there's a need for that. People want to be around people that have their same issues, speak their same language, and also have the same managing up, down, and across challenges. So I think that feeling, frankly, is what we all get hooked on, is the feeling of whether you're a member, a facilitator, or whatever, just feeling the energy and that you're raising bars. And at the end of every meeting, we ask people what they took away. And it's always feels good to hear that they were lit up by something.
Yeah, beautiful. And Susan, what's your why for kind of stepping up to the next level of building a business of peer groups?
Well, I think like anything, when you say yes to something, you have no idea what you're really saying yes to, right? So I'll start with that statement, and Mark's smile, I think, concurs with that, right?
Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing either. So
obviously the timing of the pandemic, right? The timing of new ownership of Ref North America. So we came in Q2 of 2020, and the team in South America, headquartered in Lima, Peru, had just acquired the North American Renaissance Executive Foreign Market in January of 2020. So there was all sorts of, newness. And like anything, if you are passionate about the work that you're going to get to do, you figure out the rest, right? And I can say that, we hit a lot of dead ends. We hit a bunch of cul-de-sacs. We hit a bunch of bumps in the road. And, it wasn't easy, right? We've had a lot of false starts with, different forms that we've tried to launch. And I think, 6 years later, here we are with just an incredible group of forum leaders who all have been in the shoes of their member. And so I think that's one of the things that we also are really, I don't know if proud is the right word, but I think proud and pleased that every functional forum leader has been in the shoes of their member. And so they bring that sort of subject matter expertise to their role as facilitator of the groups that they are leading.
Hey, Mike, I'll add one thing I didn't think of, and I know Susan experienced this too, is that there's an invisible ingredient that finds its way into peer groups. And that's why I never imagined myself, buying, leading, partnering with you folks on a business. I was always the co-pilot. It's the word confidence. You realize the people around your peer group table have all been right where you are, and they bought a business, or they, became the CEO or whatever. and the confidence they got from being in their peer group is something you can't really measure, but it's there.
I love that. I love that. And it's that's a great expression, listeners, that yes, of course, we get into strategy stuff, execution stuff, leadership stuff, teamwork, culture, core values, AI, business processes, you name it, we get into it in a peer group. And really what Mark is saying is all of those things are making the deposits in the bank account called your confidence as a leader. And just gradually feeling that sort of groundswell that, look, I'm not overly confident, certainly. I'm not arrogant. I'm not blind to the things that are coming at me. But you know what? I have a somewhat composed, cool, calm, collected, quiet confidence that no matter what, we will figure it out. And it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, you know, that's almost like having a personal share price, right? It's like share price is driven more by future sentiment than by past results. And if the future sentiment is cool, calm, collected, confident, then your personal share price is, you know, tracking up nicely.
Well, I would just jump onto this train of thought with, we all have insecurities. And none of us are, you know, running around advertising, you know, what our insecurities are on LinkedIn or, you know, hi, I'm Susan, I'm insecure about this, you know. And so you learn through your mates in the peer group that everyone has insecurities, and it's like it normalizes them and gives you that courage and confidence, Mark, to say, okay, yeah, so what? I have that, and I'm gonna plow forward anyway. And so I think, again, not feeling alone in some of the insecurities of you and your role is the other, I think, just another like secret ingredient that comes out over time.
Yeah, I always tell everybody that I'm not the smartest guy in the room, even when I'm by myself. But it turns out I don't have to be.
And this is beautiful because I've started to use, and Mark and Susan do to some degree as well, there's some research, I think, from 2024 by one of the big, you know, global recruitment firms that surveyed 10,000 data points globally of CEOs and C-suite executives. And then they segmented the USA portion of that data, and they published a blog and pointed at the research data. And the headline of the blog was, "It's lonely at the top!" exclamation mark. And then when you click into the blog, they headlined one of the parameters from the research of USA CEOs saying 71% of USA CEOs self-reported that they experience imposter syndrome. And that's kind of the mother of all insecurities, isn't it, Susan, right? It's like, yeah, I'm kind of faking it till I'm making it. But it's a reality, everybody. And as you've heard, it is lonely at the top, and yet it doesn't have to be. If you will come into, you know, a peer group of, you know, let's say 15 to 18 non-competing, there are no competitors in the room, good people who want to be with other good people. There are no big egos in the room. There's no grandstanding. There's no posturing. As much diversity as we can get, high tech, low tech, old economy, new economy, small company, large company, gender, ethnicity, background, outlook, personality type. The more diversity, the better. And it's not just about business, everybody. It's also about life, because those two things are inseparable. They're a tangled web of everything. And you heard, just in the conversation there, you heard, hang on a minute, what? Ref Global is head office out of Lima, Peru? How did that happen? Well, the short story is our chairman, global chairman, Manolo Vega, graduated from Harvard Business School in 1997. And he ended up, for a longer story, he ended up buying the license for Ref in Lima, Peru, and was phenomenally successful with it. Ref had grown nationally around the USA, in Latin America, and to some degree globally by 2020. And the founding owners wanted to sell. and Manolo Vega in Lima, Peru, acquired the whole global thing. And that's why we have a head office in Lima, Peru. And his global CEO, Julio Noriega, was in the States for 20 years. He's a very, very experienced CEO of big companies out of the media business. And around that same time, he had returned to Lima, Peru. He had joined one of Manolo Vega's ref forums. They were childhood friends, and Manolo asked Julio if he would be his global CEO. We've all met them, both of them, many times. They're wonderful people, and we're just delighted to align ourselves with their culture and their core values and their vision. So, Mark, tell us a bit more, if you would. Why are we so committed to this portfolio that we began to describe earlier of having CEO groups, absolutely, but also having a solid portfolio of these, what we call vertical key groups for these specialty functions, HR, technology, finance, operations, sales, etc. Tell us a bit more about why that, and also why we're so committed to our differences, our less time, less money, more community, more teamwork, those kinds of things. Tell us a bit more about why we're so committed to those things.
For me, anyways, and I'll let Susan and yourself comment, but I think it's because we recognize that it's lonely in all the roles. If you're the technology leader, people don't speak your language. If you're the CFO, if you're the controller, you're the sales executive, they're all lonely. Especially if they're in a mid-sized company where there isn't 30 of them in the same role. So I think recognizing that ourselves, having been in those roles ourselves, and our competitors are wonderful organizations. They wouldn't be big if they weren't. But we wanted a little bit more of a blue ocean approach to things so that, and in some of these cases, we're the only game in town. And some of the things that we're doing are starting to spread across the whole REF community, and other people are doing HR groups, and other people in our system are doing finance groups. But I think it's because we recognize that every role, it's not just that it's lonely at the top. Of course it is. And, it's a tough job. But all those roles can be lonely, and everybody enjoys peers, especially those peers that are dealing with their same struggles and their same, speak the same language. And it probably, stumbled over the same obstacles that everybody else is. And that actually feels good, to Susan's earlier point. So I think it's because we recognize, in fact, a lot of these folks in our various verticals had never thought about being on a board. They always thought it was for, old white men smoking cigars, when we've been encouraged, all of them, to say, listen, no, if you're in HR, you really should be thinking about being on a board.
What I would add to that is, we aren't Minneapolis, where we're land of Fortune 500 companies headquartered. We are, we have a handful of very large public companies in San Diego, but for the most part, we are filled with a ton of smaller, public and private companies. And so again, back to the peer group, the size of a peer group that someone has inside their own organization is small. And so that's where, when you are in these roles, all these leaders want to continue learning and growing in the roles that they're in. Many aspire, some do not, to be CEO. And how do you keep learning in your functional area? If you're in a mixed key group, yes, there's like more generic learning that happens, but not as much in your functional area. And, I'm working with our newest forum leader, Tracy Ward, to kind of rebuild the HR leaders forum. And as anyone knows, if you're a California, you employ people in California, you better have an army of people supporting you in helping you navigate all of the, wage and hour and other legal requirements to be an employer in California. And so the more people you can have helping you be successful in your role inside your company, the better. And hopefully less stress for those individuals, because they've got, like a safety net of people they can turn to when they've got issues.
Mike, and if I can add one thing, yesterday was a really good example. I think it's okay if I use the name Taylor Guitars, who most people probably heard of. The CFO showed up. I had talked to him before the meeting. He showed up. He leaned right in. He was great. and they're an ESOP, employee-owned company. And so just as I thought it would happen, he started talking to the financial executive in the group who's with an ESOP where Susan is actually on the board. And sure enough, those two got to talking about topics that they both shared and issues and challenges and who they both use for advisors. And so those synergies are just automatic, So it's kind of fun to see that happen, particularly if you're in the same role.
Yeah, beautiful. And because we three and others have had experience of other peer organizations, as you've heard, you and then when I joined you, we just remained very committed to, look, let's make sure that we've got a differential value proposition. We put a lot of focus on ROI and all of its different sort of layers and levels, but not least of all, let's allow people to join groups that just take less investment. Let's offer a half-day equation. Let's offer, it's not half the money, but it's maybe 2/3 the money, an equation. And let's really then work very hard to sort of, maximize the ROI that a member can get from that. So that's our dedication, everybody. One of the things that we've settled on, Mark and Susan, to help people kind of get a taste for this, if they've never experienced it before, right? It's sort of difficult to sort of fully intellectualize. Sorry, what is this? Peer what? So we have a stream of what we call taste of ref form events, everybody. We have them for these functional groups. We have them for CEOs. We have a stream of them coming up. And Mark, tell us about it. Taste of form, taste of ref events. What's that about?
Yeah, it is a great way for someone to put their toe in. They're typically, 3.5 hours or whatever. And so it gives a little introductory stuff about, what is ref, what's a peer group. And usually we'll have some of our existing members there because, they're happy campers. And so they're giving testimonials. And besides just describing what will go on in a typical meeting, we actually do some things. And I'll let you and Susan talk about one of those big things, that really is the hook. In fact, we did this yesterday with the fellow from the guitar company. I asked him to be, subject himself. He was a guest and subject himself to a case. He was great. After the meeting, what do you think he said to me? When can I join? Okay. But I think it gives more than just a description of a group. People actually get to experience some of what a peer group is like, and particularly if they've never been in one. So we like to do those because it's a low commitment, no cost, toe in the water.
Yeah, beautiful. Susan, what would you add about taste of ref, taste of form events?
Sure. And I'll back up a hot minute because I think when we think about how people end up coming into our groups, it comes a couple of ways. Usually it's from a trusted referral, right? Someone in their network has had a positive experience. Someone in their network knows us and makes a referral. And, sometimes that is enough for someone to come and want to check out a meeting. Sometimes it's like, it's enough to pique their interest. But this is an opportunity for someone to actually experience what it would be like to be part of a peer group. So that's what I would say about kind of the taste of events, that you get not all of the kind of menu items that we hold in a meeting, but a good chunk of them that give you a flavor for what it's like to be in a room with people in similar roles, helping someone process a real issue, right? We don't do fictitious issues. We actually have real issues that we process for some courageous volunteer. And it allows them to firsthand have a better understanding of what it might be like to then actually join a peer group.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And so what Susan and Mark are referring to, everybody, is we these taste of ref, taste of form events, if they're 3.5, 4.5 hours long, a morning or an afternoon, we'll give you a taste of certainly the biggest components of a meeting, a speaker, the sort of round table things that we do. And then the third element actually is the most crucial, and you've heard Mark and Susan touch upon it. We call it a case. And that's where one of the members in a normal forum, one of the members prepared in advance and framed in advance with our help, will bring a real-time issue, real-life issue, real business issue, challenge, problem, opportunity. And we take it through the case methodology in a meeting, which we might do a light version of it because we want to do 2 or 3 that day. Or if it's a really complex issue with so many layers and levels, we might do a sort of fully loaded version of a case issue processing that may take a full hour. And what we like to try to do in these Taste of Ref, Taste of Forum events is we like to do an example of a fully loaded version where we'll take a full hour with someone that just volunteered something in the room that we facilitate that sort of surfacing. And, we obviously ask everybody in the room to raise their hands to, a degree of confidentiality. We obviously, reassert to the member, don't share more than you want to because you're not yet in a private group. This is a public, Taste of Forum event. But nevertheless, we'll now facilitate the case issue processing through the various cycles of it. And then an hour later, we'll finish off by asking the member, how was that for you? And they'll usually say something like, wow, I had no idea that something like this even existed. I've just met you all. You don't know my business. You don't know this situation that I've just been articulating. And yet you gave me such valuable input. Not least of all, you invited me to look at it differently, to think about it differently, to frame it differently. Thank you. And that is the power of it. And it never really, I don't know, Susan, Mark, I've never ever done one of those that didn't land with that kind of wow factor. And then it's like, oh my gosh, there might be some more questions about, membership and all of that, but it's, oh my gosh, how do I explore this more? I think I'm very curious about being in one of these peer forums.
And Mike, what we don't often talk about is how, sure, one person has been a, courageous volunteer, as Susan framed it, but the others are also getting some big value out of
Absolutely.
This because many of them have either been in or are in a similar situation. But for me, the biggest part of not only the case process, but peer groups in general is it makes us all much better at asking questions instead of spouting advice.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
Seek first to understand and get in someone's shoes, which is the first part of the process. How do I get in your shoes to ask the right questions before I just start telling you, if I was you, I would do this and that? No, there's a process to it. And I think it makes us all better, even subconsciously, about asking people questions just in normal life, in business or in life, about trying to understand where they are before we just start telling them what we would do.
Beautiful. And the reason that why everybody that, every member gets value from every issue that happens in a group, whether it's an issue they brought or someone else brought, is because 95% of the issues are all the same. And, strategy, execution, leadership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, let's start landing the plane here because we're coming down to time. Mark, just briefly, why do you love this work so much?
Well, it's kind of addictive. Again, I mentioned earlier, it's the feeling you get, whether you're a member or whether you're a facilitator, just being around, we call it collective wisdom, we call it collective intelligence, but you come to realize that we need each other. And I think that makes it addictive, that, business, as in life, is a team sport. And so being around this team of peers, whichever seat you're sitting in, facilitator or member, it's really fun and it's addictive.
Beautiful. Susan, what would you add? Why do you love this work so much?
Yeah, for me, it aligns 100% with all the work that I do, which is around growing people and helping people become better leaders in life and in business. And so for me, that is the common denominator of all the work that I do. And certainly that happens in every forum that I've ever attended, whether I'm facilitating, co-facilitating, supporting, or listening. I feel like I learn something after every meeting. And we always end all of our meetings with, what's your number one takeaway? And it's, I've never heard someone be stumped like, I got nothing. I've never heard that in my 20 years, right?
Look, both of you, thank you so much for the last, 45 minutes here. Thank you so much for the last 20 years of, a progressive, great friendship, great work as colleagues. I'm so excited about the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years and where we can go, and the footprints and fingerprints that we can leave in other people's lives. And so listeners, if you're a CEO, if you're a C-suite executive, if you're a functional leader in some of those functional verticals that we've described, and you're at all on the fence about this, just come along and get a taste with us. Join one of our tasters. Keep your eyes and ears open for the flyers and things and then LinkedIn that put those dates in the calendar. And we look forward to seeing you there. Mark, Susan, we've been blessed having you here. There you have it, everybody. Another episode of the Peering Podcast. If you want to see the future, let's peer into it together. Goodbye, everybody, and we'll have you back next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
That's it for this episode of the Peering Podcast, where we believe the best way to see the future is to peer into it together. If today sparked something for you, share it with your peers. And keep the conversation going at peeringpodcast.com, because leadership gets clearer and the future gets brighter when we peer together. Thanks for listening. And until next time, keep peering in.